I'm Dante,
And I'm Tommy.
and you're listening to Twigging Onto Twig, a podcast where we talk about Wildbow's most reverend web serial, Twig.
In today's episode, we talk about Cat Out of the Bag 2.3 and 2.4. And is there anything else we're hoping to talk about?
I don't think so.
No.
Was there an extra material that week? I don't think he was doing extra material back then.
I don't believe so. You just put anything else of note in the. So I was wondering if there was anything else of note.
That's just my template.
Okay. Anyway, so what did you think of these chapters, Dante?
They were good. They were very interesting. A lot of talking going on, but in a very different way than the talking we had last time.
And a very different between the two chapters, I felt.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose so too. Because the first two chapters in this arc, they were very conversational. There was a lot of conversations, a lot of back and forth, and just kind of people being themselves. Whereas in chapter 3 and chapter 4, there was a lot of talking at.
Yeah.
A lot of making speeches, monologues, interrogations, but it was very much it wasn't just that sort of casual back and forth. It was very much I am going to talk at you and try and convince you of a thing.
I mean, this is our introduction to Mauer, who is, a reverend, a priest, a preacher. So
yes, but
it makes sense.
He only comes in and
at the end, but
but
I think it's kind of emblematic of the way the rest of this chapter is. It leads us
build
towards
up to it well,
to him. Yeah, build up. That's a good way of phrasing it. And we'll get to Mauer a bit more later. Mm-hmm. But I think you also wanted to bring up a Tolkien quote.
So I was reading A Secret Vice by J.R.R. Tolkien, which is an essay he wrote about his habit of inventing languages. And I've lost the place again, so I'll have to cut out me looking for it again.
You don't cut those kinds of things out. That's just the realities of this kind of podcast.
Who do you think I am, Malia?
Well, the big, long silences we can cut out. But anyway, I'm going to keep going as you look for that quote.
Says,
oh, you found it. Okay.
He says, I've let the cat so carefully hidden out of its bag, or at least revealed the whiskers. I just thought that was a really fun way of taking this cat out of the bag phrase and kind of expanding on it. But the editor kind of points out in a footnote that Tolkien seems to have been very fond of this idiom.
Yeah, you said that, and then I remembered more than once in Lord of the Rings, and maybe even in The Hobbit, but especially in Lord of the Rings, them talking about the cat being let out of the bag about various things, like the ring being in the Shire and whatnot.
So,
spoilers for Lord of the Rings, sorry guys.
Yes.
So previously on Twig, to get back to cats out of bags here, last chapter, Walter Gund, a student at the Academy, released a monster he created into the bowels of the Academy, and the monster has since gotten loose from the bowels. Our brave protagonists are called in to interrogate Walter and help to recapture this monster, and they learn that Walter is part of a conspiracy involving his powerful politician father.
In Cat Out of the Bag 2.3, our heroes continue to interrogate Walter. They learn that Walter joined the Academy in order to infiltrate it, and that he and his dad are operating on the orders of someone called Reverend Mauer. Our heroes patch up Walter and set out to confront Mauer.
And in Cat Out of the Bag 2.4, they arrive outside Mauer's church to find a large, agitated crowd gathering. Sai sees a building, and Sai, being Sai, immediately does what he does and climbs it. And then the rest of the gang follow. From their vantage point, they watch as Mauer skillfully manipulates and maneuvers and riles up the crowd.
This is really, like we've already said, this is a very talky and low action, high
stakes,
yes. But high... See, I keep stumbling over it because I don't know the right word to use, but it's not conversation, but it's talking. And it's not action, it's talking. But it's not just talking, it's specific kind of talking, where it's a high amount of this sort of specific persuasion type of talking. Yeah,
Rhetoric?
Talking at is the best
Rhetoric?
way of... Yeah, rhetoric might be a good way of putting it. It's high rhetoric, low action. So, like, not a lot physically happens. You know, we learn some details.
Pretty sure Walter might
somewhere.
disagree about things happening in action.
Well, he got beat up, and then he got patched up again. The end. I mean, who knows if we're even going to see Walter again? Like, he was just a pawn of Mauer, and he, for all we know, his use has been completed, and that's the last we've seen of him.
Well, we're going to see a ruddy-looking Stitched at some point.
Yes, that's more likely than the alternative, I think.
Yeah, poor guy.
Anyway, there was a lot of interrogation and rhetoric. So I don't think that I have the smarts to really, like, do a play-by-play analysis of like the rhetoric strategy and all that sort of thing. But one thing that I thought was interesting when it came to the interrogation of Walter in Chapter 3 was that they had this whole elaborate lie about how Walter's father had caved in and was already confessing to the academy, and so he needed to hurry up and cooperate or he'd be thrown under the bus. And I really felt that by the end of it, it seemed pretty clear to me that he didn't need that subversion.
No.
Like, he was, you know, between Helen's grabbing him by the privates and, like, nearly pulling him apart to just the threat of what the academy could do to him, I think he would have caved anyway.
I agree with you, but I do feel like the breaking point was his attempt at breaking free and trying to choke Helen, and Helen being entirely unfazed by him. And I think that sort of, you know, he's the son of a powerful man, and presumably a powerful man in his own right, and he has that entirely, all that privilege, everything stripped from him, and the fact that he can't even hurt this little blonde girl who looks like nothing anymore to save himself, I think kind of reinforces the point for him that he's screwed.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it really is, like, the whole strategy is to show him, like,
there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, exactly. And so taking away his idea that he could rely on his father
and his own strength.
And his own, well, it would be easy for them to show that he couldn't rely on his own strength because all they had to do was let Helen at him.
Yeah.
But I guess I just feel like, you know, they wanted to take away that lifeline that he thought he would have, but I feel like they could have just been like, you know, even if your dad is super powerful, like,
the academy is more powerful.
The academy has you in our clutches, and we can, you know, have these little children tear you limb from limb.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just kind of felt like it was a good strategy, and I just feel like by the end of it, looking back, just kind of in retrospect, it looked like it was like this guy didn't even need that much strategy. Like, he was pretty easy to crack.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. And that kind of what you're saying about them having this big strategy kind of leads into my next point, is that I thought the structure of the interrogation was really interesting. You know, they're all sort of acting in concert to keep Walter off balance, both physically through Helen and mentally, the rest of them, plus Helen also, in that they sort of kind of act throughout the entire thing like it doesn't matter that he's there or not. Like, they're just kind of there to indulge themselves or indulge the academy, and, you know, the academy's going to get all the answers no matter what, and, you know, Walter himself, even if he doesn't give the answers, is utterly irrelevant. And I kind of got the vibe that it's just the Lambs have experience interrogating people, and they kind of default to this pattern whenever they interrogate someone, even if the person doesn't, as you say, need
that's a very good point.
The structure. They're just used to doing it a certain way.
Yeah. Although, if it is kind of like just their default flow that they've fallen into, the fact that Mary
effortlessly slots in.
Exactly. The fact that she just so fits in perfectly to that is really telling.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, if I remember correctly, Sai kind of internally notices that and comments on it, like how, I mean, it's sort of that whole judge, jury, executioner bit.
Yes.
Like Mary just sort of effortlessly, you're like, oh yeah, that's obviously where we're going with this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sort of epitomizes the whole point there.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, that's as far as the interrogation goes. And then we also have the whole situation at the church when they get there. And
Yeah.
that's more complicated to talk about because that's like, I think we're going to talk a bit more about it under like the character header.
Yeah.
About Mauer himself, but like there's kind of a lot going on with him as a character, with this plot that he's seemingly putting together.
Yeah, and potentially whatever connections he might have with other groups we might have heard of in previous interludes. And
yeah, and it's interesting, like when we had the puppeteer back in Arc 1, like the last thing we found out was the motive. Like we knew what he was doing, but we didn't know why. And then in this case, it's kind of reversed because Sai comments like, oh, well, now we know why he's doing it. He's trying to, like, build up this resentment against the Academy. But what we don't know is what he's planning to do with it.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we don't know, like, the purpose behind the act itself.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, I didn't think of that, but that's an interesting sort of reversal of the structure. Last time was more of a mystery until, putting the pieces together, who done it in a way.
Yes.
Whereas
now we know who it is, but we don't know what they're doing.
The piece, yeah.
Another thing that I thought was interesting, like I was kind of thinking about in Worm and in Ward, there was often like a contrast between like the protagonists and the antagonists in their abilities. Like it was like more thinky type characters fighting against more like powerful brute strength type characters. And here it's all been thinky characters versus thinky characters versus thinky characters. Like Sai, Mary, Percy, Mauer now, they're all the same kind of like, manipulative talker type characters. And I thought that was interesting that we're going in that direction, especially since this whole setting is all about the brute force monsters, and yet our story is all about the thinky people.
I think that is pretty deliberate, though.
Well, yes.
Like it has to.
It's deliberate, but it's interesting.
Yes. I mean, it's setting us up for conflicts that are more difficult to resolve, I guess. Or have to be resolved in smarter ways than let Dog and Catcher at them. Though, as we did point out in the Dog and Catcher, or in the Percy interlude, that Dog and Catcher are clearly much smarter than their appearance and like what we would think, grotesque Frankensteinian monsters are.
Yeah, definitely. And the Gorger as well, we noted, seemed to be a lot smarter than that as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean,
I have to point out that these characters are also a lot smarter than me, and I'm glad that they're fictional. God, yeah. Like we can pretend like we're analyzing them, but like honestly, they're even just what's written about them, they're talking circles around us, I think.
Well, I also feel, and I don't know if this is just baby brain or me getting dumber with age, but I was rereading my notes from my live read, which was about a year ago, and I feel like I was now analyzing things a lot more intelligently than I am when I was reading it this time to pull stuff out. So I don't know what's up with that, but I don't like it.
Are you pulling on your older notes for this thing?
Oh, I did, absolutely. And I don't know what I'm going to do when I run out of those.
How far did you get again?
I didn't finish this arc.
Okay.
So
we're only a few chapters away from from you hitting new material.
Yep, which is exciting. I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be hard to restrain myself from reading more. But
yes, that's fair. Well, we'll just have to ply you with other reading material.
Yeah. I look forward to you're letting me Mistborn?
Yes.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, and then we can read that discussion question answer from last week.
True, yes. Okay.
Yeah, so let's go into world building. In the podcast episode description for the audiobook, chapter 2.4, Kim Dauber wrote, "Keep an ear out for some more easy-to-miss tidbits about the world of Twig in this installment of The Lamb's Adventures," which is just a great little thing to include.
Mm-hmm.
So I was keeping an ear out, but I only found one little easy-to-miss tidbit.
Which was? I definitely missed the one that you wrote down.
It was a short fence. Let me see if I can find the actual quote. "We had to hop a short fence that surrounded the lawn, possibly to keep bugs away."
It's like, what fence keeps bugs out? Like that.
That is a great detail.
Yeah.
I don't know what it says about the fence or what it says about the bugs or both.
I think probably both. More about, I was going to say the bugs. I'm just picturing giant cockroaches gorged on toxic biological waste from beneath the academy roaming through the town at night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just like these little tiny, like you said, you missed it, and I probably would have missed it if I hadn't been keeping an ear out for it. But these little tiny details are just so great.
Absolutely. And we've talked about this before about how Wildbow does that a lot. Just sprinkles sort of bits of knowledge as if they're common sense. I'm blanking on the word I'm looking for, but a piece of knowledge that's just well known. Everybody knows
commonplace.
It. Yeah. And just treating it, something that we as outsiders to the setting don't have it as commonplace, but because it's treated as commonplace, we don't think of it as anything but, unless it's pointed out like you did here.
Yeah, I really like that. It's I think pretty common in fantasy settings for things to be approached this way, but it's just so effective.
Some people do it better than others.
I'd say Wildbow does it better than others.
Yeah. Well, I was listening today to the old Doof Club podcast on Watership Down, the book club, and they bring up that
spoilers for Watership Down?
Not really.
Okay.
Just that they compared it to a bunch of other more or less fantasy settings that have that same kind of thing, and Watership Down does it really naturally, whereas very often in other settings you're kind of like, okay, this is a thing that they're talking about that's not there, whereas they're treated. I'm trying to articulate my thoughts here a little bit. That it's treated as a thing that's not worth noting or pointing out beyond its existence, which makes it more real than if it's look at this thing that is unique and new and
yes,
special to the setting.
Right. Yeah. Don't point it out, and that makes it more natural.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So you also brought up, I think, another bit about Radom. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You did.
Let's go through our list of points that we wrote down.
Yeah.
So we keep bringing up this rain and the constant rain and the weather and whatever. It's one of those things that is just really key to the vibe of this setting. And I just thought it was really fun that they're talking about the nicest day Radom has seen since last fall, and they called it the closest thing to daylight that Radom ever got to enjoy.
Yeah, it's just if we didn't think this place felt grim enough, here's a little more.
Mm-hmm. This is the best, the lovely weather. It's only overcast. There's no rain. I bet they've never seen blue sky in their lives.
Yeah, probably not. That's really sad. Yeah. So I thought Walter describes Whiskers' point a little more this thing, and I feel like it's less stupid than I did last chapter.
Is that why you're putting it under world building instead of Monster Corner?
Well, because I'm talking about it as a function of the way Walter, at least, and I guess the Academy, because the Academy funded this project, sees warfare and the purpose of warfare. Because Whiskers, we find out, is not meant to actually be a weapon. It's sort of meant to be an area denial type thing, which tells us, that's designed to be put there so that it slowly breeds and takes over an area and makes an area essentially unlivable. Walter says that there's no weakness to it. But he could be wrong, but he's the designer that plays the thing, and he doesn't think that the Academy could get it, which means that once they've infested an area, there's no way to get rid of it, which kind of indicates that there's no desire to actually claim land from an enemy, just to deny it to the enemy.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting.
Which kind of tells us that the war exists not for any kind of real purpose, but for the war to exist.
Yeah, because we still don't even know like who they're at war with or why.
In my head, we did see that map of the globe, but that's from within this United Crowns of America or whatever it's called. And for all we know, it's sort of a 1984-esque setting where there are, spoilers for 1984, 3 giant world powers that have just been at war in unchanging geography forever, and they maintain their power through the war. And for all we know, this is what the situation is here. These are ever-escalating weapons of war that are being designed just to operate on a frontier that is static and unshifting. And really, the war exists to sort of give a purpose to the Academy's existence and to maintain its own authority over the people. Of course, we have to design all these things. We have to do these abominations because otherwise the, Indian Empire with their clone slave armies are going to overrun us and destroy our way of life. So, better an evil that we know that is ours than that evil.
Mm-hmm. And this was pretty common in imperial days anyway, where there was wars between the various colonial powers and the various colonized insurrections and so forth. So
yeah, but imperialism overall generally was over acquisition of land, resources, whatever, which Whiskers pretty much prevents.
Yeah, it's like if we can't have it, nobody can have it.
Or even we don't want it, but we don't want you to have it either.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of just, and it also kind of makes me think of, I read a long time ago about how the DMZ between North Korea and South Korea has become a sort of wildlife haven, refuge.
I'm sure.
A lot of endangered animals live there that wouldn't be able to otherwise. So not a good thing that stuff's happening, but there are silver linings. But I feel like that wouldn't even be able to exist in the world of Twig.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of,
especially if they would seed that area with Whiskers.
Yeah, it's if your landmine can get up and walk somewhere else and breed and make other landmines, it just makes it even worse, even scarier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'm sure we're going to get more about this and warfare, considering we learned Mauer was a soldier before he was a pastor.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of this angle of the setting sooner than later.
Yeah, for sure. At least I hope so. It's obviously not the point of the story, not where we're going, but...
Well, it doesn't seem to be yet.
Yet, yeah, that's true. Maybe the whole point of the lambs is to be deployed as frontline soldiers.
Well, I think that this arc is pretty specifically stating otherwise. With Whiskers being put out there.
Yeah.
It's we know we need to participate. This is not what you're good at.
We'll give you the things that you're... Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But, there's a lot more to warfare than the front line anyway.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. I can see the lambs being dropped somewhere into, behind enemy lines in theory in some city, and, Jamie sort of learning the city at a glance and all the patrol routes and everything, and Gordon befriending the sort of, then just setting up this city to fall.
Mm-hmm. They could very much be a intelligence team.
Yep, absolutely.
In active conflict.
Yeah. And then they have Helen to be Helen.
Knowing Wildbow stories, we're going to be at the end of this story, we're going to look back on us saying that, and we're we have no idea.
Yeah.
Why are we so underestimating where this story is going to go?
Definitely. Yeah, so the next point that I had is just a very small world building one, but Cy describes Walter as, this ruddy complexion, outdoorsy type looking person who cares about his appearance and I just thought it was interesting. It brought to mind that turn of the 20th century, like mid 1800s to like early 1910s type of exercise, which is, outdoor hiking and Teddy Roosevelt type of being fit rather than the modern person who's working out to be fit and going to the gym and all that. Um,
Mm,
Sai even points out like, oh, he has muscles, but he also has a bit of a belly, which means he enjoys things, and that is kind of what I picture people. I bet the CrossFit bro of the early 20th century was this type of guy who would go out and like go hunting and fishing and camping for a weekend and climb a mountain and
yes.
yeah. I thought it was a fun way of just showing a little bit of a difference with our modern reality without it
Yeah.
being again obvious.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really good. I completely agree with that.
And I think you wrote religion. I added some stuff.
Sure. I just felt like, we've got Reverend Mauer, we've got a church. Like, religion is always a big part of, like, a society's cultural, historical development sort of thing.
Hmm.
And this, I think, is kind of uh, like you were saying, how we're getting a bit more insight into, like, the warfare aspect of the society. I think we're also about to see a bit into, like, the religious aspect of the society.
The
Um,
things that they care about and
yeah. Sai mentions that Radham is not overly pious,
that is true. Yeah.
and that there was that the crown wasn't, or the crown or the academy were not getting along very well with the church, and so it was interesting to see what kind of person would want to be stationed at a church in a big academy town.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like it makes sense is what we were reading or sorry, my mind went on a bit of a adventure there thinking too fast. Um just like it makes sense that there's hostility between the church and the secular authorities in terms of the academies and whatnot, because it feels like this kind of work is in theory, you know, playing God with, creating life and modifying life and adjusting things. And there are definitely organizations and groups within the church that don't like it on the level that we do it in our society. And that's
Mhm.
nothing compared to,
Certainly the churches that I grew up attending would have been very much against what the academies are up to here. But I mean, who knows whether that applies to whatever religious institution happens to be
yeah.
prevalent in this setting.
Yeah. And to be honest, because we hadn't really run into like the concept of a church or whatever up until this point, which I mean, to be fair, is a arc. It's only an arc. I had kind of assumed that the academies and the crown had dismantled most of those kinds of institutions. But
Interesting. I feel like, I mean, some, like, I don't know, I'm going to show my ignorance on, like, historical politics and whatever, but I know, like, some big, like, oppressive states dismantled religious institutions to maintain power.
yeah,
But a lot of them, like,
co-opted.
co-opted, supported,
Hmm.
cooperated with the churches. And I think that the British Empire was one of those. Like, um, I mean, in terms of like the colonization of North America, a lot of like wasn't the British necessarily; it was the French in our case.
Hmm.
The missionary outposts were a big part of the initial colonization. Um,
The push.
Yes.
Hmm.
And so I feel like it would, I would almost have expected the opposite. I would have expected the churches to be like part of the crown and academy, uh, you know, structure. You've got the crown and you've got the academies and you've got the churches, and they're all kind of one big, um, imperial power structure that
Hmm.
holds, everything together.
I definitely don't disagree with you, and I don't think that it's out of the question still for us to run into that kind of thing later on in the story. That us to find out that there is, an archbishop or cardinal or whatever that is a advisor to the crown or whatever, working that way, at least in some sort of nominal power. And there's presumably a difference between this kind of potentially these kinds of low level popular churches and the actual institution of the church.
Sure.
The grassroots church is the word I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But again, and we see that Mauer is of the church, and he's involved with local politics and connected to politicians.
At least he's getting involved now.
Yeah, that's true.
I suppose this is where in our notes we have the locations section starting, but I feel like we're just kind of already in on that.
Yeah. And we're talking about, we've talked about the Crown States of America a little bit already, and
I think it's important to call out we've been speculating sometimes more seriously and sometimes more facetiously, but now we have confirmation this is the Crown States of America.
Yep, we are located in the Eastern Townships.
Does it say the Eastern Townships?
No, I am just deciding that this is.
We also don't know that the Crown States of America is the same thing as the United States of America, but in this setting.
Plus Canada.
Because it could include Canada.
I mean, and for all we know, Amerigo Vespucci discovered Australia. And
sure. That's not what I was getting at, but sure. But I was also thinking, didn't the United States have this whole big war with Mexico and a bunch of land transfer grabbing thingy, whatever?
I mean, for there to be, I kind of had this when I read Crown States of America, I kind of had two sort of thought processes on the alternate history there. But the fact that it doesn't. Well, yeah, okay. My two thoughts first. First is that there was a sort of Portuguese crown type of situation where for whatever reason, I don't remember off the top of my head, the Portuguese monarchy moved to Brazil, and Brazil became where the monarchy was based.
Okay.
So it could have been a similar situation to that, where something happened in the British Isles, and the monarchy fled to the Americas for whatever reason and just established itself there.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't think of that, but that would be a very interesting turn of events.
My other one, I don't know how accurate this is. This might just be apocryphal type of folk knowledge, but I remember learning or hearing or seeing at some point that after the American Revolution, George Washington was offered the monarchy of the Americas and turned it down and refused it. I mean, I don't know how accurate that is or how, it's just
I've heard that too, yeah.
Thing, but and that could be where we are with that also.
Sure, but also this is we know that this is an empire that covers the bulk of the globe.
Which is why I was assuming the English monarchy moved to the Americas for whatever reason and inherited the British Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I feel like it makes more sense for the crown of the royals to move to America than to India, to the Raj.
I mean, to me, the idea of 13 states?
Yeah.
Becoming a dominion within the empire the way Canada and Australia did, and calling themselves the Crown States of America seems like the simplest and most likely scenario rather than the crown actually moving in.
Oh, I kind of assumed that it was a literal crown, that the monarchy, there is a monarchy. But you're right, that makes sense that it could just be a title, the crown, the crown dominions are a thing. Yeah. And Wildbow is Canadian, so that would be more...
King Charles doesn't live here, but we still have the Crown of Canada. We still have a monarchy in Canada. It's not a weird new thing. It's just No,
but I'm saying with it feels for the fact, for the entire red on the globe, that is, 2/3 of the globe being red, being the Crown States of America, kind of implies that the power is centralized in America.
Sure. Is that what you're thinking this is? That the whole red thing is the Crown States of America rather than the red is the...
I assumed so, yes.
Interesting.
That was my read.
Okay, that did not even occur to me as a possibility. Because
that's
to
kind of
me,
wild.
it was very clear that the red covering the globe was the British Empire. And that the Crown States of America were one of the many dominions of the empire.
Interesting. And I wonder if this is a reflection of our two different educations. I went through the American schooling system. You went through the Canadian one. Yes. And Wildbow presumably went through one that was more similar to yours than to mine.
So I think that clearly indicates that my read is the correct one.
Obviously. Yep. Oh, that's interesting. But because the next line in our notes is literally, the crown has come closer than anything to actually controlling the world. The academies
but the crown is the monarchy, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But just the fact that, like, I was reading the crown and the Crown States of America as, like, synonymous.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see why you might think that, but, like, you know, I'm used to the fact that, like, the crown in Canada and the crown in the UK are two different entities, but the same person.
Yes, no, that totally makes sense.
In the same way that the CEO of X and the CEO of Tesla and the CEO of SpaceX are three different things, but are the same person. Which I find some people find that easier to understand than...
No, I completely understand how monarchies work, and, like, the feudal system, and you know, your land ownership under the feudal system. I get that. It's just, it didn't occur to me that this would be the situation in this case.
Yeah. So the crown, in this case, clearly referring to the global empire,
entity,
has come closer than anything to actually controlling the world, says Walter, and the academies are what let them do it mostly.
Yeah. No, like, I'm willing to accept this, your read. I'm not sure I'm convinced by it, but I'm willing to accept it until we get further information.
Sure.
You sound offended that I'm not.
I'm offended that at the idea, like, the cultural spread of American culture throughout the world is already something that a lot of non-American cultures have problems with.
No, absolutely.
And so the idea that 3/4 of the world are the Crown States of America is, like,
just viscerally problematic.
Yes, viscerally uncomfortable.
Fair enough.
The other thing that I pulled out about the Academy, like, in addition to the Academy's helping the Crown conquer the world, is Jamie pointing out to Walter that every student thinks about how much they could get for the sort of knowledge the Academy has, but not many actually try it. And Lillian points out it's suicidal. I thought that was interesting, that there is that much, like, that the Academy has that much of, like, a clout, I guess, but clout isn't the right word. It's like, you know, in real life, I would imagine that even if the Academy was really evil and you could get in a lot of trouble for it, people still would try to steal these ideas from it, unless the Academy is really good at rooting out, like...
Well, didn't the Snake Catcher have stolen Academy texts? I want to say that was one of the things, and I mean, but the Academy...
But the Snake Catcher got in trouble not for having stolen texts, but for having a monster that was causing trouble.
Exactly, yeah, that's my point. Like, I feel like had the cat snake not been a problem, then it wouldn't have been suicidal for... Yeah.
So that's why I think it's so interesting that so few people try it, because they think it's not worth it.
Though our perspective on that is Lillian and Jamie, who are very firmly ensconced in the system.
That's true.
You know, I don't know how much of an unreliable perspective we're getting there.
That's fair. But, like, even then, like, even for them to think that it's suicidal or difficult, like, if it were as easy as it should be, it would be happening all the time.
Yeah. I mean, and that's why I guess the Academy has the Lambs or Dog and Catcher or
So I wonder
other.
if Jamie is mistaken and Lillian is mistaken because they're biased because they're part of the Academy. Maybe a lot more, like Jamie says, not many actually try it. Maybe a lot of people do actually try it, and Jamie just thinks they don't because the Academy doesn't know about it.
Or the Academy doesn't want people to know about it. Like I
Yes.
absolutely agree with you. I mean, I would not be surprised if, I guess, like in Boyle, there is a whole cottage industry of biohorror.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, like someone's granny growing a cat in a vat behind the house type of
Mm-hmm.
deal.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to assume that you're right about this and that this is biased because I feel like it would make more sense if there are a lot of students stealing.
Even snippets of text, like
Yes.
poorly Xeroxed copies of
Mm-hmm.
textbooks.
Yes. Put it into the photocopying bush.
Exactly. Spit out some leaves with.
Yeah. So I'm going to assume that this is a lot more of an issue that the Academy is ignoring or covering up than what's
Doesn't
implied
care
here.
to. Yeah.
So I guess the next section in our notes is the church, and we've already talked about religion and like the church as an institution, but we also have a little bit about this actual church building that I thought were interesting. Most notably, where they note that there had been some damage to the building that was repaired with plants, like all the other buildings have been in this setting, but that the plants were cut back flush with the stonework, unlike most of the other buildings where the plants would repair and then they would grow and display their glorious red foliage. And I thought it was interesting that I wasn't sure whether this was just like a detail about this world where some places cut it back and some places don't, or if it was more indicative of the church as being more like they want that stonework exterior
visible,
even if they're relying on this plant technology underneath.
It's showing off. I don't know whether it's demonstrating a certain hypocrisy or pragmatism.
That's what I would assume if I were to take this as a metaphor. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know that I really thought about that, but that's an interesting point to bring up.
Mm-hmm.
Did I copy this quote or did you copy this quote?
You did.
Okay, good. Because I did want to note about something about it, but I didn't want to cut you off if it was yours. So the quote I have is: "The structure was pale, the shingles were brown, and the stained glass stood out all the more for the drab exterior. A lot of reds in the glass used for the window." And my first thing that I want to point out is that if I remember correctly, Mothmont was also described as pale. So like the two presumably feature locations of these cases so far are pale in contrast to the rest of the town. They stand out for whatever reason. I don't know if there's anything
Okay.
to read into that, but I just thought it was interesting to note.
I didn't really remark on that because I kind of would assume that maybe a lot of structures are pale and it was just like a description of the building. But yeah, if these two buildings are notably pale in contrast to most other structures in these towns, then that would be very significant, I think.
Like I think, yeah, because I feel like the fact that it's called out as pale is indicative of the fact that it's unlike the ones around it. Because otherwise, then what's the point of pointing it out? It's just a building.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know what to read into that. And I'm trying to remember if Mothmont was also described
maybe
as
it's
having
hinting at a more recent work about Northern Ontario.
certain alabasters and yeah, I don't remember
Yeah,
if Mothmont was described as having any red in the glass or in the construction.
I don't remember. I know that it had a lot of glass, but it
Yeah,
wasn't stained glass. I don't think. I think it was just broken glass. So it
and
would
were
have
the
been like.
it's like I picture the vines and the thorns red, but that might just be my image of Stranger Things. Like,
Well, they've definitely mentioned the redness of the foliage
that's
in
true.
this
Yeah.
setting, and I don't know if that was just like the majority of plants, or like plants at the academy, or plants, but I kind of just get the impression that all of these like construction type plants are just like red plants.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Yeah.
So yeah, I would assume that the plants that were, which is interesting because like the plants cut back flush with the stonework, but if the stonework is pale and the plants are this deep red,
then we have this like veiny building.
Yes, and it's like, you might be cutting it back to like look flush, but it's still standing out.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I wonder how different then, if there's a lot of reds in the glass of the window and then the walls are like interspersed with red also. I've got this picture of this building, this church that looks like it's just splattered with blood.
Interesting. Well, usually the glass of a stained glass window doesn't really show up very much on the outside of the building.
That's true. It's the light shining in.
Mm-hmm. Unless it's dark out and light inside, in which case you'll see the stained glass window, but you won't get much of the actual
That's a good
exterior
point.
because it'll all be in shadow. So, so I guess you get a bit of red either way. Mm-hmm. It is interesting that the glass is predominantly red because, like, I don't know, stained glass, there's a lot of variety in stained glass. But
red isn't one of the colors that stands out to me as being, like, very dominant in stained glass.
Mm-hmm.
But like I picture it's very dominant in this.
It's dominant in this setting. So
yeah, but I'm thinking. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I could imagine like it just being kind of natural to incorporate into artwork a lot of red because that's just true. A common color. But if that were true, you would kind of imagine a parallel in real life of green, and that doesn't seem to be much of the case.
If I picture stained glass windows, like in churches, the colors that I think of predominantly are green, blue, and yellows.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a question of like cheaper to produce historically or anything like that, but those are, the colors that are, and those are, I think, the colors. I mean, I guess it's the representations often of scenes or, people, saints or whatever, inhabiting our world. So it makes sense that it's colors that reflect our world.
Yeah,
vis-a-vis here where it's
sky,
colors,
yellow, sunlight, and
whereas here there are plants that are red all the time, so it makes sense that there's a lot of red.
Mm-hmm.
Though it's interesting that Sai calls it out as something that's worth noting.
Mm-hmm. I personally am inclined to suspect that this is similar to the plants in the stonework, an indication that there is this academy influence underneath the the external sort of independent facade that they have.
That makes sense. Do you want to move on? Do you have anything else to say about the church itself?
No.
All right. I just wanted to note one thing when they're talking to Walter for the monster corner. Just a bit note about Whiskers, more about Whiskers rather than Whiskers' role. When Walter's talking about its purpose was this drop it and it breeds and has babies, whatever, fast. Size like is it pregnant? And it's like, no, it's male. And I feel like in this setting, that doesn't seem, I doubt that's actually an issue. And
right.
B, back to the point where these are stupid, why not just create an asexually reproducing monster if its purpose is to be dropped behind the lines and spread?
Maybe they want to, I have no idea. It's just, I could speculate on reasons, but they probably wouldn't be good ones.
I feel like, I guess we get a reason as to why they half-assed this project, but it feels like they half-assed this project.
Yeah.
And do you want to move on to our next section?
Yeah, the historical references.
Yeah, where you get to reveal breaking news.
Yeah, so in our last episode, we were talking about Jacob Black. Gordon makes fun of Walter and says, "Who do you think you are, the next Jacob Black?" And we were kind of speculating, who is this Jacob Black? Like, clearly we're referring to this character from Twilight because that's the only significant Jacob Black there is. But Wildbow posted in the Doof Discord that
word of the author,
spoilers for Worm, but that Jacob Black is the birth name of Jack Slash. And apparently this was a word of God at some point, but it's not one that got picked up by the fandom at all because it is not anywhere on the internet. So I guess we're the purveyors
breaking news here.
of breaking news here.
Yep.
Jacob Black is a reference to Jack Slash. Jack Slash's birth name is Jacob Black, and you heard it here, folks.
Wildbow is a Twilight fan, and he named his he's clearly Team Edward because he named his biggest villain in Worm after the other side.
I do want to mention that. Hold on, I'm going to look up on Reddit.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet Manzana posted on the Parahuman subreddit that there was a manga created by Osamu Tezuka who has a character named Jacob Black in it, who's a super doctor that performs impossible surgeries in insane situations, and also has a little girl sidekick that is actually a sentient tumor that was given an artificial body by Jack. And I think that this sounds suspiciously like Jack Slash and Bonesaw.
Which one is older?
This is from the 70s.
So tisk tisk.
I think it's more likely that this is Wildbow being a fan of Osamu Tezuka than being a fan of Twilight.
Perhaps.
I don't know if this is a reference or a coincidence, but I think that it's similar enough that it wouldn't surprise me if there was some inspiration there.
Well, all I know is that this means that when a worm gets made into a TV show or a movie series or something like that, Jack Black has to voice Jack Slash.
Sure.
All right, so let's move on to the characters here. So obviously our first one we talk about is Sylvester. And I think we get, especially in the first bit of of 2.3, a lot of lying to himself by Sylvester. Where Sylvester, repeatedly points out that he doesn't feel anything about what they're doing to Walter. He's not feeling guilty. This is only another job. And I really feel the fact that Cy needs to bring it up to us in his own internal monologue is telling that he does feel guilty, he does feel bad, and he does not like what he's doing.
Yeah, Sylvester, you keep telling yourself that.
Yeah, are you sure here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I like that, and I think you're right. Yeah, because he would feel bad. Like we've seen before that he's not as heartless as he likes to pretend he is. So
yeah, no, for sure. Mm-hmm. I also noticed that he seems more put off by Helen acting with emotions and emoting. I guess emoting is better than acting with emotions, but Helen emoting than he is by creepy stoic Helen, because I feel like he learned who creepy stoic Helen was, and he doesn't know how to predict smiley, cheerful Helen. Because he keeps it more than once in the past arc. He talks about how what is Helen doing? Like she's smiling. Is she doing this act for someone? Is it and I mean, obviously we don't know, and there's no way for us to know unless we get a Helen perspective. But part of the purpose of the Helen experiment we learned is that they wanted Ibbot to create something small, but was like a person out of monster parts or whatever. And Cy keeps talking about or thinking that Helen emoting is her acting and learning how to be a better infiltrator or whatever. But what if Helen is just learning she's growing into a more mature person and able to emote, and these are her actual emotions? And I don't know where I'm trying to go with this necessarily, but I just feel like Cy doesn't even consider the possibility that Helen is feeling the things that she's showing she's feeling.
Sure. One thing that I think is interesting, like you pointed out that he's uncomfortable with Helen behaving in a way that he doesn't understand. That it's the fact that he can't read her really bothers him a lot. And Ace of Sword pointed out something similar in the subreddit about Rick, because we were talking about Rick last time.
Yeah.
And how Cy just completely goes over the top in his
hatred
of Rick. And Ace of Swords points out that, like, a big part of it, or my interpretation of what Ace of Swords was saying, is that a part of it is Sai doesn't understand Rick. He can't figure out what's going on in Rick's head, and that's what really bothers him about Rick.
Rather than Rick's actual behavior, it's the fact that he doesn't know how to put Rick into his little bug box.
Mm-hmm. I think that both of those together, like, it really does ring true about Sylvester. Like, he puts so much of his identity and understanding how people work and what their motivations are. And so having someone that he just can't figure out just by looking at them must be so infuriating for him. And so I think that's an interesting little facet of his character that we're seeing here.
No, I agree with you. I agree, I guess, with Ace of Swords, and it's not a perspective that I had really considered when looking at Rick in the previous chapter. You know, I kind of took Sai's perspective of Rick being horrible as, like, truth, and I should know better than to take Sai's flawed perception of anyone, including himself, as gospel.
Yep. We get a bit of stuff between him and Mary, which I think we'll talk about later. And we also, as we remarked before, he had his crowning character moment in climbing up on top of that building.
That's just such a little kid thing. Like,
yes.
Like, if I have an excuse to climb this rock wall, then I will.
Yes. But also, I'm just really enjoying this idea of Sai as like, oh, there is a building, I will climb it.
Because it is there.
Yes. Project Wyvern exists primarily to solve wall scaling problems, and secondarily to deal with understanding and manipulating people.
Yeah. Sai's actually part spider monkey.
Exactly. Yeah. So moving on to like the lambs as a whole, we had that whole judge, jury, executioner thing that we mentioned before. That was such a...
It was so over the top.
Yes. But also it was just such a fun character moment. Like, you know, he's like, we're the judge, and then, what was it, Jamie pipes in, and the jury, and he's like, Jamie, you're the best. And I'm like, of course Jamie would be the one to know where he's going with this.
And then Mary.
And then Mary jumps in, and it's like, oh, like we said before, she just like is fitting into this group so seamlessly. And
then Gordon says something, I don't remember what it was, if we have to. And it's like, that kind of not as much of a flow there.
And then Sai responding, like thinking at them, being like, Jamie, you're the greatest. Mary, I love you. Gordon, you're okay too, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just like, it's one of those things that's like, it's kind of lame and kind of awesome
at the same time.
And it's like, they probably think that they're doing something amazing.
Yeah.
But like, even just like the amount of just like each of these people involved, like showing a bit of themselves in like this one tiny little thing. It's just like, I don't know. It's just so great.
Yeah. And I feel like Mary must have felt really good about this. Either that or she knew exactly what to say to manipulate Sai into feeling good about her. One or the other. But, so while we're talking about the other lambs, do you mind if I move on from the judge, jury, executioner? If not,
Yep.
There's a particular line, as Helen moves past, that's not the quote, but the quote here is, Gordon very deliberately looked to one side as her dress brushed his face. And it's something I've noticed a few times throughout the text. I don't remember immediately offhand previous examples, but it's something that stood out to me here, that there have been a number of beats where each of the lambs kind of goes out of their way to not look at each other in any kind of like intimate way. Like, if it weren't brought up, there'd be no reason to think about it, since, you know, it's all textual. You know, I wouldn't assume that they're looking at each other in any way that's not quote unquote normal. But since the fact that it's being deliberately brought up, that's, you know, specifically being called to attention, like, it means something. I don't know what it means.
I assume that it's a contrast to at the very beginning of the story when Sai is looking up Lillian's skirts, or she's like, I'm not going to climb up in front of Sai because he's going to look up my skirt. And Sai's like, I would never do that. And then he like thinks to himself, but I lied or something. Because like this is just like the sort of like, I think this is just kind of how things were then. It's like the women would all wear skirts, even if they're doing things that might be better not doing skirts. And it would be like, kind of a matter of etiquette to like, kind of pointedly not look like you're maybe going to, like, wasn't there a whole thing about like, men are supposed to precede women going upstairs or something so that he wouldn't be below the
I don't know,
maybe or something. I don't remember exactly, but I feel like this is just kind of like what happens when you have like dealing with skirts in these sort of action scenarios, and like in this sort of like more conservative setting where it's just kind of like you kind of are supposed to make a point of not looking or something, I don't know, and it's kind of in contrast to Sai, who is like, Sai totally would look. Well, I don't know about Helen, but if it was Lillian, he totally would look, or he would pretend to look, or he would like,
I feel
make
like
her think he was looking, and then
I think that's more likely to make her think, just because I think didn't we get a point at the beginning of like last or the beginning of this arc that like none of them have really hit puberty yet?
Well, I think we talked about that last time.
Yeah.
So I think it's more like an etiquette thing than like an intimate thing. But I think it's more of a contrast between Gordon like deliberately being polite versus Sai deliberately being, a bum. Yeah, that's where I would assume this is going.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. It just felt interesting to me that it was being called out explicitly.
Sure. Speaking of Helen, Sai gives a bit more information about her design. He says her musculature and joints are different in configuration and type. Mostly, she's bad at exerting a lot of strength very quickly. She's almost weaker than me when it comes to throwing proper punches, and that's with her being bigger than me.
Almost, says Jamie.
Almost, yes.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. It's like, it made me think of an alligator, in that I learned somewhere that an alligator is incredibly strong when it's biting down, but does not have that same strength at all when trying to open its mouth. So if you're fighting an alligator, you can just hold its mouth shut, and it's kind of can't do anything about it with its mouth. Presumably has the rest of its big body to fight you with. If you're fighting an alligator, don't do that. Don't fight alligators. That's a terrible idea. But yeah, just it's interesting, that kind of like one-directional strength.
Yes. It kind of reminded me of like non-Newtonian fluids.
Okay.
Like cornstarch mixed with water.
Yeah. You punch it and it's hard. You poke it, it's soft.
Yeah. So it's like she's bad at exerting a lot of strength very quickly, but if she pushes slowly, like she'll never let go.
Yeah. No, definitely is interesting. I also got a kick out of the line. I think Walter says, all the perversions that were created here. And Helen says, are you calling me a perversion? I think the answer to that is yes. Absolutely.
But also, you don't want to call her a perversion to her face. That would probably be a bad idea.
Well, especially not in the situation that Walter's in.
Yes.
Though I don't think that Helen would actually care about being called a perversion.
No.
But yeah, I agree with you.
For all I know, she probably enjoys being called a perversion.
Or has some emotion that is entirely alien to us about being called. I'm just assuming Helen is an octopus in human body, by the way.
Sure.
That's the way I've been operating with Helen. That's just...
I wonder if she's like proud to identify as like one of the monsters.
Well, she seemed to be comfortable and happy about the bowels as a place. Like she's kind of like,
she's obviously not ashamed of it.
No.
But I wonder if she like is proud of it and like identifies, like thinks of herself as like, oh yes, I'm one of the monsters. These are my people, sort of thing.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
It's, formative years in a place called the Bowels, surrounded by monsters.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mary. Mm-hmm. What do we have about Mary? Oh yeah.
Her
the way she jumps right into the interrogation of Walter and just like completely projects her own situation on him.
Your dad used you as a tool and now just left you, and you deal with all this shit on your own.
Yep. At first I was like, oh, good job, Mary. And then Cy points it out and is like, maybe a bit too much is happening there. Yeah.
And I noticed it was interesting there that Cy's like, and if she is that actually deeply traumatized by her father figure abandoning her, then that means I messed up and I'm on the hook for having brought her in, and we're going to have to stop her.
Yeah. Well, he did push that on her more so than was actually true.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I don't know. That's still a point that I'm pretty sure is going to come back and haunt him.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We already talked about the executioner bit. You pulled out this quote, I think.
Oh, yeah. So we talked about the end executioner thing, and Cy was really proud of her for that. But also at the end of the interrogation, he says to her, I thought you were going too hard on him, but turned out to be just right. It's like, I think Cy is genuinely proud of her. Like we were talking earlier about Cy, like, everything he says like needs to be taken with a grain of salt. But I think he's genuinely proud of her here.
I think so.
Or at least proud of himself for being a good influence on her.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure Cy doesn't have a single motive, like a singular motivation there. But I agree with you that, like, I think he's genuinely proud and kind of potentially blind to some of the dangers she could pose if she does. I don't know. I think he thinks he's read her and he understands her, and we'll see if he actually has.
Yeah.
And she's also surprisingly good at climbing despite her poor shoes for it.
Oh yeah, that's true, because she does that like balance maneuver at the top of the roof, and Cy is like, oh, I thought I was gonna like save you from a ungraceful fall or whatever, but
Cy's like, you actually are the perfect girl. You can climb and manipulate.
She's everything he wishes he were. With Jamie, there was that interesting bit about the acting as an orphan.
Yeah.
Where Cy was like, if he pretended to be an orphan, they would just look at him and say, yep, you're an orphan, and move on. But if Jamie did it, they would see that they would see that he was like potentially fixable, and
he's a cute orphan.
Yes. And how Cy and Helen had both worked with him on his acting skills to kind of pull that off, which I thought was fun.
I love that Helen is involved in this acting. She's the one who's like learning to be this infiltrator type person. That, like, it's what we see with her with every time she comes up, and she has come up like every episode, and I still forget her name. The woman, the old woman with the rabbit fetus.
Mrs. Thetford.
Yeah, her. I've always forgotten her name. But like she kind of looks at the rest of the lambs as like a gang of gross things. But Helen is the one that she can save and do good things with. And Gordon too. With some work we could save you from this rabble.
Mm-hmm.
But like Jamie doesn't come up there, and it's interesting that Jamie here is like this one. He could be fixed from being an orphan, which is such a horrible way of like interpreting it, or
Yep.
But that's the way Cy talks about it, so
I think he's right. That's kind of like a unconscious bias that a lot of people might have.
Oh, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I also thought it was really interesting the way that he says. I think Gordon asks him, like, "What do you know about this Mauer guy?" He's like, "Yeah, I've heard about him. If I think about it, I know his routine. Like, just like, oh yeah, this guy that I like thought about a little bit. I know exactly where he is right now."
Yep.
It's just really interesting. Like just the sort of contrast there between the two parts of that same sentence.
Yeah. Give me a second to explore my
Mind Palace.
And I'll find that information for you. I wonder if he uses a Mind Palace type structure to keep his thoughts in order, or if he's just kind of got his own recall.
And it's interesting because Sai explicitly points out that he doesn't feel like he's good at memory, and it's just pointing out more how the group needs each other to operate. Because again, as we just said, Jamie learned from Sai and Helen how to be a manipulating little orphan.
Yes.
And on his own, he would have just been a memory bank or whatever.
Maybe Jamie should teach Sai a few memory tricks.
Yeah, but I mean,
might be useful. But I think Sai is quite comfortable just offloading that and being like, I don't need to remember this. Jamie's got it.
Jamie's got this drawing somewhere in his thing that'll give me the answer I need.
Yep.
This is a little bit of a worm spoiler.
Okay.
But I think it's interesting to see Jamie as sort of a refinement in a narrative perspective to the Tattletale type character in a way.
Okay.
I don't really know where I'm trying to say, because this is kind of something that just came into my mind as we were talking just before. But I feel like Wildbow is really good at writing characters that are smart.
Yes.
It's really hard to write a character that feels smarter than you actually are, and Wildbow pulls it off repeatedly in different ways.
I mean, Wildbow is clearly super genius, and so it's easy for him to...
Oh, he's just writing dumb characters to him.
Yeah.
Maybe. It's just, I guess what I'm trying to say is just, it's impressive how I'm just trying to, I can't get this thought to crystallize in my brain properly, so I'm going to move on.
Okay.
So there's not much to say about Gordon. Just I liked the line that he says that don't hurt him too badly, Helen. Even if he doesn't decide to talk, the Academy could use him for raw materials. And Sai, I couldn't resist smirking at that line. It was a good one, very Gordon. And it's just, I think, really continuing to emphasize the Gordon has a pretty face, but he gets down and dirty.
Yep. And also, it was a good line.
It was absolutely a good line. Yeah, just really scaring poor Walter.
It's the sort of line that Sai would use as well, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Again, a sign that they're rubbing off on each other.
I was like, if Sai had said it, I wonder if Gordon would be thinking the same thing. That was a good line. Very Sai.
Almost certainly. I don't know if we're going to get any of that, but I'd love to see interludes from the perspective of the different lambs.
Totally. Especially Helen, because her
alien thought process.
But yes, definitely.
And Pale has shown us how, I guess Pact did too, to some degree, but I think Pale especially dives into these sort of I don't want to call it xenofiction type stuff, but alien perspectives and presenting them in really interesting ways. I don't know if Wildbow has really done that before Pale.
There were some pretty xenofiction perspectives in Worm.
Oh, I guess, yeah, there's the
one and then the other one, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to actually outline them, but you're right. I'm ignore me. I am so yeah.
In terms of other people, we've got Walter, who continues to be a sad sack. I think it was interesting, his perspective on his dad, because last time when we read chapter 2.2, it was very much a perspective of, Walter's dad is a powerful politician. He's a big shot.
We can't mess with him too much.
But here, Walter says, he's powerful, he's rich, but he's only a man in the middle, a servant to the people and a servant to the Academy. And I mean, I suppose technically that's true, but I thought it was interesting that was the perspective that Walter took.
Yeah.
How he's subservient the academy, like not just as like a public servant or anything like that. Like, is taking the attitude of like, my dad is supposed to be rich and powerful, and yet he still has to suck up to the academy.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, in a normal situation, like, yes, politicians should be like a servant to the people, but like having to suck up to the academy in this setting is like, you know, we know what the academy is like. That's not necessarily a good position you want to be in.
No, absolutely not. And yeah, like you said, it's interesting, or I thought it was that he's willing. I guess it's more of a reflection of his own situation, but that he's willing to believe that his father is willing to sell him out to save himself, whereas he himself clearly feels bad about selling out his own friends. Like, he doesn't actually sell out his friend, but like sort of confirms that they're involved when the lambs bring it up. Like, it feels like, honestly, this chapter did some work towards making me feel very sympathetic to Walter beyond the fact that he's, you know, being tortured.
Yeah.
Like, as a character, I feel more sympathetic to Walter than I was expecting to. There's a point where Walter mentions that he originally wanted to do research on the five senses, and that the only way they could get funding to do it was if they applied it as a weapon of war, which is what Whiskers resulted.
Right.
And like that's really sad. Like, this guy, I feel like this guy came in with this like, oh, I want to do something that can help the world, and I have to apply it to war. And maybe I'm reading too much into Walter, like what we're getting out of Walter here, but like this chapter felt like it sort of rearranged the way I thought about him. Last chapter, I very much had this idea of him as this like boorish frat bro, and here
and like
I have,
that was what like Hale, the impression Hale gave us as well.
Yeah, this people have depth. But yeah, like it kind of made me think about something my sister said. She's got a PhD in immunology now. Something to do with like basically academy work, you know, gene editing and proteins and some stuff that I don't nearly have anywhere near close to the education to understand.
Sure.
But she's mentioned in the past that it's kind of significantly easier to get grant funding if you add something about, you know, curing cancer in the proposal, even if it's not at all the focus of the study. And like,
yeah, interesting.
Here, I feel like you get the same kind of vibe. Like, oh, I want to do something that does all the senses and, you know, helps people. And also, here's how we can use it in the war.
Right. Yeah.
This is how we get money for it. Or, yeah.
This is just real life science.
Yep. Which is sad. It's like, you'd think, you know, mad scientists, but I guess this is where we get into the biopunk aspect of the setting. Like, the mad scientists have to be part of the oppressive structure that kind of dictates what they're allowed to do.
Yep.
Anything else you want to say about Walter?
Nah. So
so dismissive.
We're never going to see him again. Who cares? So yeah, we meet these characters, Dickie and Bill.
Do we meet them?
I mean, I put down Dickie and Bill, and then like I came back to it afterwards. I was like, "Who the heck are Dickie and Bill?"
We don't meet them. We sort of peer at them over the ledge of a roof.
Yes. So Bill Warner, he owns the production line down by Tennant Street. You knew his son at Mothmont, Gordon.
Therefore, someone important, because Mothmont was families of important people.
Was it Eddie, do you think?
I kind of assumed so, but that feels like it makes the world too small.
Maybe, yeah.
But
and then Dickie Gill is in a position of power that the Academy gave him. He's on the short list to be the next mayor. Which is interesting that the Academy can be handing around like mayoral positions.
I assume it's not official, but like more like, hey, this is our guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it interesting that it seemed like Dickie Gill was kind of like actively sabotaging his own career in terms of like speaking to the public there.
Yeah.
Like, and they're clearly deliberate. You know, it's not like ineffective politician. He's deliberately setting up Mauer to be the savior.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of thought it was interesting.
I wonder if he's kind of like playing both sides because he's not sure where the cards will fall.
I don't know. I felt like this was very, like, this felt very deliberate. Like, either he's setting him, like, because what he does here is he's setting up Mauer by presenting himself and by extension, the Academy as incompetent. So, like, even if he comes out of this, if Mauer loses, he's lost too, because his actions here have made him seem like, at best, an ineffective doofus.
Right.
And, like, there's no way that the Academy would be like, oh, yeah, you're our guy still, when you couldn't handle a crisis.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So he must be pretty convinced that whatever Mauer is planning to do is going to be effective.
It's going to be right. And it kind of makes me... I'm going to talk about this, actually. Never mind. I'm going to talk about this when we talk about Mauer.
Okay. Which we might as well just get into, because the only other thing I had noted was that, these two guys are pretty powerful henchmen for Mauer.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think Mauer is kind of the big focus of, even though he comes in at the end, like, just it was all building up to him, and he makes a very strong entrance. Like,
oh, absolutely.
Like, he has a lot of presence in when he walks into the story.
Oh, I mean, just from his first visual appearance, he is, like, very clearly... There's something about Twig, and I don't know if it's the setting or it's Sai as a narrator here, but I feel like we get these really visceral descriptions of people who are important. Like, we got that really caricaturish description of Percy with the, like, pointy devil beard and, like, the swept back hair and all that. And here we get this description, his hair was vibrant, a bronze that verged on a surprising red where the sun peered through the clouds to touch it, and his skin was smooth and unlined. When he walked, it was a touch off balance, back bent to one side, almost a limp. He did wear black shirt and slacks, one arm bare, and he wore a chaplain's collar, not the tab at the shirt, but a proper band of white that encircled his neck. To go with a limping gait and odd balance was a heavy sleeve that covered one arm, extending past the fingers. And I mean, the first thing that we get is, like, this is so clearly a carefully constructed entrance by him, with the sun shining down on him, and, like, I said that out loud, the sun shining down on him, and I just realized that means that there's a sunlight. There's a beam breaking through the cloud cover there to sign it, but it has very religious imagery to it of, I'm forgetting the name of that thing in art where, like, especially like medieval art of saints, where the sun shines down on the saint to represent, like, divine favor.
Sure, yeah.
And that's very much the image I'm getting here, and I'm certain that in setting, Mauer is very deliberately crafting this.
I mean, I don't think he could have deliberately crafted the sun peering through the clouds.
I think he took advantage of it at that moment.
Okay. You think he staged the escape of Whiskers for a day when the weather was going to be exceptionally good?
I mean, if the Academy controls the weather and he's got people in the Academy...
Okay.
Why not?
I can see that.
It's like, okay, let's have less cloud cover this day because I have to make a big speech and I have to be the savior. I mean, the fact that it's
not implausible. I'll give you that.
It's the fact that like, we're pulling deeper here, and, like, they're talking about how this is one of the nicest days that this place has had in a year. Again, if something is in the text, that's probably because it's important.
Sure.
But anyway, yeah. When I first read his description, I was almost convinced that he was, the product of some academy. And then Sai says that explicitly, and then Jamie's like, nah, he's real.
Yeah, except for his arm.
Yeah, which is just an arm that is slightly too big and painful.
And yet he's, like, ashamed of it and covers it up completely.
Yeah, because I'm assuming it's the hidden arm is the academy arm and not the exposed arm.
Yes. Yeah.
It's also a really weird look, like the one sleeve and then one bare arm.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe because it says that he has like the sleeve covers one arm extending past the fingers. So maybe the larger arm is the one that you see.
It's
and
possible.
Then the other arm is too short, and he could only get shirts that had like standard length sleeves. And so the normal sized arm is not long enough for the sleeves, and then the bigger arm fit.
I thought he didn't have a sleeve on the other arm.
It does say one arm bear, so I'm just
yeah. Okay, it's like one arm bear. There it is. It's just again that is such a wild appearance.
Yes.
Yeah. So I looked up Mauer. All I could find is that it means a wall in German, and there's a Joe Mauer who is I don't know baseball enough to know whether he is moderately successful or very successful baseball player called Joe Mauer, but so Mauer doesn't seem to necessarily be a reference to someone historical.
I wonder if that ties into the stone walls that are shored up by Academy plans.
He is a wall that is shored up with the Academy arm.
Yes, in the form of Dickie Gill.
Yep, sure. And his yep. And I thought it was interesting that our introduction to him is very far away, which means that the lambs aren't able to interfere and get their normal read on the situation that they would were they actively involved. They just get to see Mauer operate entirely as he would operate normally without any kind of influence on the situation. Without tainting the experiment, as it were.
Yeah, that's kind of what happened with the other two as well. Like with Percy, observe first and then infiltrate. But yeah, this is definitely very much a far off introduction. Like we've mentioned that there's a lot of build up to him, and he doesn't show up till the very, very end. Yeah, it's very much a sort of arm's length introduction to him.
And it still feels like a powerful introduction.
Yeah, well, I think it's more powerful because of that.
Yeah, he's proselytizing. He's manipulating and maneuvering a crowd in a way that we just saw Sai kind of fail with the orphan situation previously. Like the woman. And, this guy has a certain, institutional power behind him as a reverend who's presumably known and loved by his congregation. He's a pillar of the community, and he's got, these politicians who are also pillars of the community there.
Right.
But it's still, he's engineered a situation that I'm sure Sai would have loved to be able to engineer.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's interesting that, we see his the things that he's saying to people are, very clearly manipulative, or at least Sai identifies them as clearly manipulative. But if we didn't know that he was behind the release of Whiskers, they would be solid spiritual advice and community leadership.
He would be the good guy.
He would be the good guy. This is the sort of thing that a good pastor should say. Let's stay calm and think of the people we've lost, and come to us for counseling if you need it. He's doing the right things, and it's only the fact that we know he's secretly behind it that makes his duplicity here manifest, which I thought was very interesting.
I definitely agree, and I really look forward to the inevitable interaction between the lambs and Mauer.
Yes. We'll see how well Sai fares in a one-on-one verbal match. I feel like Sai won't do as well as he thinks he would.
Oh, for sure. I think Sai still has an inflated sense of his own abilities.
Yes. Or maybe Sai will learn from some lessons from Mauer, and will be able to use that to be more effective moving forward. He's clearly so in awe of Mauer during his speech at the church. He's
there. I want to be you.
Yes. Now all we need to do is see Mauer climb a building, and
Sai's just lost from the academy forever.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm changing sides.
This guy, he gets me.
Yep.
All right. So we do have a discussion question, but since we are moving more quickly this time than previously on this episode,
Yeah, we've gone from like once a month to like less than 2 weeks.
Well, I mean, that's only if we get it out by Wednesday. So
True.
But around 2 weeks, let's say.
Yeah.
Figure we'll extend the discussion question a further month. So what was our discussion question?
So discussion question was, tell us what other body parts correspond to features of the Academy. Things like, the bowels, the claret hall being the heart, the tower being the head,
etc. Yeah. What else? What
other body parts do we have in this Academy? And
what is the appendix? What is the femur? I don't know.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. We got one discussion question answer, so hopefully we'll get a couple more, and then we'll go through all of them.
Yep. Don't worry, Hobo Demon, we have not forgotten you. Especially considering you put a really interesting extra bit of parasite knowledge there, which was super creepy and super cool.
Yes. Hopefully that'll get people excited to listen next time and find out what that was.
Or they could just look on Reddit, but don't do that. Just listen to us instead.
do that and listen to us as well.
Or that. Is there anything else you want to bring up before we wrap up here?
No. Do we want to do my biology fact, or do you have a...
No, I liked your biology fact. I wanted to hear more about it, which is why I didn't ask earlier if you wanted to do a different fact, because that one sounded really cool. I wanted to learn more about it. So, everybody, thank you for listening. We're enjoying this dive into Twig, and we hope you're enjoying following along with us. You can read Twig with us at twigserial.wordpress.com, and if you do that, and even if you don't do that, very strongly encourage you to go to Wildbow's Patreon at patreon.com/Wildbow and support him. He is a full-time author, and this is how he does it. To the generous donations of people like you and me.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I got going too fast there. Please leave your answers to our discussion question in our Reddit thread.
Yeah. You can reach us at totwigpodcast@gmail.com. totwigpodcast on
Twitter.
X.
Twitter.
The Reddit thread in r/parahumans, the discussion thread in the Doof Discord.
Where we are still squatting, yes, thanks to them.
And next episode, we'll be covering Cat Out of the Bag 2.5 and 2.6.
So
I should probably confirm that those are actually the two next chapters.
I believe so. I mean, that'd be quick for an arc.
Yes.
But I will zoom through real quick.
2.5 and 2.6.
Wonderful.
And for our biology fact, I am co-opting the biology fact space once again, because I was listening to the QI podcast, which is called No Such Thing as a Fish. The name of that podcast, by the way, is a reference to a fact that we talked about in our last episode. The fact that some bony fish are more closely related to mammals and birds than they are to other types of fish. So there's no such thing as a single cohesive
fish
monophyletic group of fish that doesn't also include a lot of things that are clearly not fish. Anyway, the QA podcast is called No Such Thing as a Fish, and I was listening to it, and they dropped an interesting fact that in 2006, the Natural History Museum in the UK discovered a new species of insect in their own garden, which is pretty
cool.
Great.
Yeah.
I actually did a bit of looking into it to find out more information, and it turns out they didn't discover a new species of insect.
Well, that's just disappointing.
They just discovered a species of insect that they couldn't identify, and it took them a long time to figure out what it was. It was Aerocatus longiceps,
which is a what?
Which is a type of seed bug. It's a true bug. Yeah, so they saw it, they're like, we don't know what this is. They looked into it, still couldn't find anything. Turns out that the person who wrote, like, the definitive guide to species of seed bug in Europe made some mistakes, and so they thought it was a new species that wasn't in there. But anyway, It was a whole thing.
Googling it. Do we have those here?
I don't know.
Because there's I have been in Ottawa for 2, well, not Ottawa, I'm in Gatineau, but close enough. 2 Junes now, and both years there have been these like swarms of clump of like red bugs that like cling to the side of buildings and stuff, and they look just like that. And I don't know, mating takes place in May, so that's like reasonable. That's the same timing thereabouts.
It looks like the ones that are found in Ottawa are box elder bugs.
Box elder bug. Oh, but those are much darker looking. Interesting. Anyway, yeah, box elder bug. But they do these really, really gross clumping swarms.
I think you mean really cool clumping swarms.
No, they're really gross. They are. And they like absolutely cover things.
Oh, yes, this headline refers to them as box elder bug breeding orgies.
Oh, yep, exactly. That seems right. Box elder bug breeding orgy is probably not something I want to Google, but I hit enter. Ottawa. Anyway, good to know what they are. They seem to have vanished again at this point, so
yeah. So
just wait till next May.
It's also a true bug, but not the same kind.
Perfect. Anyway, bye everybody.
Bye.